Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
I'm Olly Weingarten. I'm currently founder, chief exec of Summit Sports, a 360 athlete and content creator management agency which aims to tell athletes and creator stories first and foremost. I've had a very checkered career, which I'm looking forward to discussing with Greg, having been at the Premier League and Formula One, sports tech, eSports and boxing.
Cool. That was like a game show introduction. Contestant number one.
You want to do it again?
That's very good. No, it's cool. It's fine, but it was very quick. But no, that's cool, man.
I can do it again, though. I can make it longer.
Well, if you want, it's up to you. I mean, you're still you, so it's up to you.
Good, so good.
I'm keeping this all in, by the way.
Oh,
yeah. But no, man, it's good to see you, and thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate everyone who, and I know I sound like a broken record to my audience here, but I always appreciate everyone who comes on the show because it's not a short show. Do you know what I mean? And so I really, really appreciate it. And it allows, really for the listeners and watchers at home to really get into the minds of such a great variety of entrepreneurs and so on. And I really want to get in under the hood with you because you've accomplished so many amazing things. So, you touched on it there. Talk to me a bit more about sort of the early years. So, what is it that got in? Is there a path into entrepreneurship? Was it something that you kind of did, very early on? Or is it something you fell into as you got a bit older? Like, what's the relationship like with entrepreneurship, sort of, if we go back earlier into your career?
I think I fell into it, to be honest. And I think the reason I fell into it is because I realized I had a skill set, but I couldn't find the job that suited my skill set. So I thought, well, I better go off on my own. I mean, I was a lawyer, trained as a lawyer, moved to England as soon as I could because I thought there'd be more opportunities there to finish my, essentially post-grad career. Did a master's in sports law and converted to English law, and then trained in London. And I didn't like private practice. I recognised that wasn't for me. And fortunately, I got very lucky with my first job. I ended up at the Premier League with the apt title of legal services executive on a miserable salary almost 20 years ago. 20 years ago, actually. I know. I don't look.
Legal services executive sounds like it's a well-paid job. Do you know what I mean? I'm thinking that's a minimum of 100K, plus.
Sadly not. Sadly not. No.
Oh, man.
And actually, what happened was the guy who hired me, who probably wasn't way over that, moved to the FA to do the World Cup bid, and I had to sink or swim, and it was the making of me, if I'm honest. I came into a role as a newly qualified solicitor. I was reporting to the chief exec on multitude of issues that affected the core of the Premier League's business, broadcasting essentially. I was doing a lot of anti-piracy and trademark protection. Then I got into sponsorship and rights deals. And then I got into lobbying on intellectual property right. And I had a lot of autonomy there. And I think if I track back how I operate now, the fact that I had that autonomy, but I dealt with the autonomy in a very, I don't know whether savvy or clever is the right description. But I think what I did was I showed the chief exec I could operate in a way that he could trust me and I could go to him when I needed to go to him. But otherwise, I could be trusted to get on with the job and not drop them in proverbial piles of, you choose whichever noun you'd like to add at the end of the sentence.
We can say shit on this, it's fine.
Oh, well, yeah, but I didn't really. I mean, look, I think in hindsight, if you asked the chief exec, I probably took them down warren paths that maybe they wouldn't want to have gone down. We sued YouTube and Google in the US, for example, in a class action. Now, I did that and it brought IP rights protection into a better place. But is that what the Premier League should be doing? Well, actually, you look at the size of the business now, it's exactly what they should be doing. They become a behemoth. And if they don't protect the value of their contracts, then they don't really have a business. So I think the autonomy I had at the Premier League in that role probably stood me in good stead. Thereafter, I continued in essentially autonomous roles. I worked in Formula One. I was another apt title. This was Secretary General, and it was significantly better paid than a legal services exec. So I was Secretary General of the Formula One Teams Association. I had to herd cattle. Self-interested, egotistic team principals and owners of Formula One teams who can't agree if it's raining outside, let alone on what they need to do to improve the sport. But I had a small staff. I worked in Geneva. Then when politics got the better of it, I moved back to London. And it was for me to drive forward. And again, if I look at the autonomy I had in the sort of the entrepreneurial instinct I had for the teams, just even thinking out loud about the Circuit of Americas was going to have its first event, and I said, well, let's do something in New York. Let's hire up Times Square and let's try and drive some revenue through it, etc., etc. Now Bernie Eccleston killed it off at last minute, but it still was a great project for me to be involved in. So I had a lot of autonomy there, and then going forward, I worked in sports tech, and I drove Virtually Live's business forward. I'd like to say monumentally, but that might be a bit strong. But on broadcast and sport, I gave them a platform that they hadn't had. But again, I was working on my own out of Europe when the board was in Switzerland, and the studio was in Malaga, and the other studio and the office was in the Valley in Seattle. So I was operating out, I say Europe at the time, is now not Europe, it's London, given Brexit. And again, I had a lot of autonomy, and I had a little sports agency, and I was working with a few interesting clients and athletes around sponsorship, etc. So to that point when I left Virtually Live, and it's shown me the up and coming trend around eSports, is when I decided to become a fully fledged founder and set up London United. So there was little pieces that I can take from the Premier League and Formula One and Virtually Live, where I was putting my entrepreneurial skill set to good use, but it was a culmination of maybe 13, 14 years so cumulative experience that then said to me, right, let's take the plunge. And have I looked back since? Yes.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think we all have as founders. But so where do you think that entrepreneurial skill set came from, and what was it? You keep referring to this entrepreneurial skill set that you you came in with it initially, or you'd refined presumably over that 14, 15-year period. So what was it, and where do you think that came from?
Where it came from is a really interesting question, which I've never been asked before, and I haven't given it a huge amount of thought. But my instinctive reaction is you either have it or you don't have it. And if you have it, you sort of groom it from people around you. And I think if I look at my parentage and my late grandfather specifically, who was an immigrant during the war from Austria, came to Scotland, set up a company that floated during his life. We were very, very close, and I took a lot of learnings from him on how to handle money, how to work, the work ethic, and how to treat people. I think that probably stood me in the best stead. And then obviously you see what your parents are doing and how they operate in business. And then I suppose as you go along through life, you come across other people and you look at what they're doing and you see if there's any learnings you can take from them. But really good question, actually. But I think probably from my late grandfather.
Interesting. When he fled Austria because of the war, then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Was he an Austrian Jew?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, my family, my great grandfather and my grandfather and my grandmother fled Algeria because they were Jewish. They were Algerian Jews, and they fled because of different reasons. But yeah, it's an interesting how the displacement occurred. For so many different reasons. 4 Jews were being persecuted in so many different places. But yeah, let's not get too political though, especially given the current climate. Yeah, interesting. So had you never really sort of considered that before about sort of what the early exposure you had to entrepreneurialism and how that's kind of affected, always been sort of sat there within your psyche as
no,
bubbling
probably
away?
not, because when you've got latterly when you have a family and a mortgage, but even in the earlier days when you're a bachelor and you've got your flat and you're having great nights out and as many holidays as you want, you just want the security of a salary in reality. Right. So I probably didn't, especially when you're getting well paid. If you're making enough that you're comfortable, there's no real reason to change, is there? Unless you see this glaring opportunity that is not going to, be to the detriment of the status quo.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and look, there's a lot of different types of founders in the world, and I'm sure you, like me, have met all different sorts, but there is a large percentage where they have or they could earn a very decent salary in a sector, in a role, and for some crazy reason they decide to roll the dice and become a founder, and there's only one logical reason for it, and it's that they really are passionate about what it is they want to do. Like that's it.
Well, I'm a two-time founder now. Yeah, I'm a two-time founder, and the amount of people that say, do you not just want to get a job because you would do very well? I'm
Yeah,
like,
but you're unemployable at that point.
well,
Let's be honest. I know I'm unemployable. Most founders I know are unemployable.
yeah.
Like, we'd be the
I know.
worst employees.
I think I'm sort of in that realm, but
Yeah.
ultimately, it is madness, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs have got a degree of madness around them and risk. They are risk takers, and I think that the biggest challenge is probably with the other half. It's with your spouse, and my missus seeing me doing it all over again and going, but bloody hell, that was a painful journey when you last did it. Why are we doing it again? And you're like, because there's something there, and you're really passionate about it, aren't you? And you think that's the route to take.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's come up a few times in my conversations, both on this show and outside of this show. With partners, and it seems to be a fairly common thread, actually, that the founders that are able to get some amount of success, however you want to measure that, have a supportive partner, right? Whether it's a husband, boyfriend, wife, girlfriend, whatever, that someone that either gets it, or they're supportive. And I know that sounds almost like an obvious thing to say, but it's interesting, because there are so many entrepreneurs that I meet, founders that I meet, that don't have that, because they might be single, unmarried, divorced, whatever. But it seems to be a really important factor, because there's that stability, there's that something that you can go back to, and there's someone kind of cheering you on a little bit, even if they don't fully understand what you do, like my wife, who just doesn't really fully understand it. Like, I tried it. We had a weekend away this weekend for the first time in a very long time, just me and her, and she was asking me about it, and I got out my computer and I was getting all excited sharing her, and I could just see the more I was talking, the more she was just like zoning out. So I don't get it, Greg, but I'm glad you're excited about it. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think that's quite an important factor for you in your journey to have that? I mean, I'm assuming that she was supportive, because you're doing it again and she's still around. So I'm assuming that there was some support.
I question whether she has choice, because ultimately, as long as I'm paying the bills somehow, she doesn't really have a huge say in what I'm doing, does she? She's like, why don't you get a job? And I'm like, well, have you seen that? I mean, A, the market might be suppressed, or B, you don't find anything interesting, or C, it doesn't pay you what you want it to do. For me, it's always really been about the interest. Like, I got to do something interesting. And I have looked at the market on a couple of occasions, and the odd thing might pop up, or it doesn't pay well enough. And you're like, well, it's not enough really to get me out of bed. So is she supportive? She is, but we have a running joke, because we're always moving to a different country. I come out of my office, go in the house, go, would you move to Saudi? Would you move to Singapore? Would you move to Geneva?
Or just to see her reaction?
Well, no, it's generally because something has triggered that conversation. As I say, in between roles, I might have been talking to an agency about working with them, and they didn't like the idea of commuting to Saudi. They want your boots on the ground, or there's opportunities to present themselves elsewhere. So I test the water. I actually, personally speaking, I would like my kids to live abroad for a period of their life. I think, particularly in a foreign country where they could learn and pick up another language and culture.
So you haven't moved since you've had kids, then? You've been studying since then?
When I had my first child, I was living between Geneva and London for a little bit with the Formula One role. So my child was born within 3 months of me taking the role. So on top of traveling to every Formula One race, I was spending time in Geneva, because that's where the office was. But other than that, I think my kids have just got used to me pre-COVID traveling a lot and not being around. And now we are set in Hertfordshire.
Lovely. I definitely want to come back to that. But before we kind of go to a bit further in the journey, that's sort of more closer to home and the exit and all that kind of stuff. Why did you become a lawyer? What was about? Was that something that you always had your sights set on? Or, talk me about that. What drove you down that path in the first place?
When I was growing up in Glasgow, we were around family friends who were lawyers, and one of them in particular was doing some media law, legaling the newspapers, getting some really interesting cases. And if you'd asked me what did I want to be then, I'd have said a football agent. And there was a guy called Jock Brown. He was a sports personality. He was a commentator on Scottish TV. He was also a lawyer, and he was an agent as well. And he was the guy that I thought, wow, that's actually...
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
The guy I want to try and emulate because he's got all the skill sets to do everything that I'd like to do in an ideal world. So I managed to get work experience from one of the family lawyers at a very prestigious law firm in Glasgow, and consecutive summers I went there and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, okay, this has given me the zest for actually going to university to study this, and it might get me to where I want to get to. So that's really what it was to do with. There was nothing else I really fancied doing. I was never going to be a doctor. I was never going to be an accountant. I'm crap with spreadsheets.
But it's interesting because, you know, most... and how old were you then when that sort of thought popped into your head? What sort of age?
Well, I went to university still. I was 16. I was like a month before my 17th birthday. I started university in Scotland because I left school after fifth year, which you're entitled to. You don't need to do 2 years of A levels. You do a year of hires. So I must have been 12, 13 when I started doing the work experience, I suspect. And I remember the first day, and I still remember the first day of work experience. They gave me the proper work experience job of doing the filing, going through in a proper filing room which files were too old and which needed some updating. And I literally walked up and down the stairs with piles of files. And then my first day, I was still in the filing room at 6:30 because I thought I'd make a good impression. They're like, "We're locking up. It's Friday night. What are you doing?"
But it's interesting because they're like, you know, my son's almost 10, and you know, and even looking back at my age, you know, my life at 13, 14, I don't think I had the sense to realize that that would have been something I wanted to get into. Like, you know, it would have been, if it was football, if it was football I was into and the Premier League I was into, I would imagine myself on the pitch, right? I think most kids, that's kind of where they were, and I assume that probably that's up until that point. That if you were into football, you probably thought the same, right? It was like, I want to be a footballer, you know. So it's interesting that you kind of then just, I don't know, there's this light bulb moment where you're just like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, but actually, it's interesting. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters with a son in the middle. So my daughter's going to be 13 in a couple of months. My son is now 11, and my youngest is 8. My eldest has no clue what she really wants to do. My son, who loves football and plays at a decent level, knows he'll never be a footballer, but he's got more of an inkling that he wants to go into business, or he wants to be in media because he sees what I'm doing. I took him to a boxing gym last week. He interviewed the Love Island guy that we work with, you know, and then he interviewed a boxer, and we filmed it and we put it on Instagram, and he was really good at it. So he's got more of an inkling of what he wants to do. Just from being around what I'm doing. But the daughter, has got no idea.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's just there's no rhyme or reason to it, is there?
No, you know, that light bulb moment just arrives probably when you least expect it.
Yeah, and it can arrive several times in your life,
for sure.
You know? Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so then you had that light bulb moment, and then you went down the path. How long do you have to go to study to become a lawyer? It's quite a long time, right?
Yes, it is, and I've made it longer. So I did a 4-year degree in Scotland with a year in Germany, and then I did 2 years in Manchester, which was to convert to English law and do a master's. So it's 6 years of studying, and then you've got to do a 2-year training contract at a law firm, and that's very competitive. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's very competitive. You've got to get a place at a law firm. I remember application after application going off.
And then, so working in the Premier League, was that your first role?
It was my first role as a qualified solicitor. So I trained at a law firm. You know, I had a job before that because a training contract pays you. But then, you know, flying my wings, it was my first role.
So how did you land that? I mean, that's quite that's not a small organization to be walking into as your first role. As
I remember I was just looking at fortuitous. I mean, luck favors some people, but it doesn't come along very often. But when it does, it's almost like serendipitous. I was looking at the Law Society Gazette magazine, and I just saw this advert in it. It was like legal service executive of the Premier League. Like, bloody hell, how quick can I get my application off?
So right time, right place, basically.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I've been offered a job.
Some things are just meant to happen.
Yeah, some things are meant to happen because I said to you earlier, I didn't want to stay in private practice. I didn't like how private practice law firms operated, probably because you don't get the autonomy, if we go back to part of the earlier conversation as well. And they really wanted me to stay, but they offered me a corporate role and I didn't want to stay. So it was just right timing, right place.
Fair
and I'll just very anecdotally, I'll give you, there was a partner at the firm, and this probably highlights why I didn't like the place to an extent. But there was a partner there whose team I'd been in, and he'd never spoken to me. I was just a trainee, so he'd never spoken to me. And I actually wanted to qualify into that seat, but because they did the interview 2 months into the 6-month placement, and if you think about the previous a year and a half, there've been other trainees that done full 6-month seats. The person that's just done 2 months coming to interview has not got a chance in hell of getting a seat there. So the partner had never really spoken to me. As soon as he heard I was going to the Premier League, he became my best friend. Like, you got to work with us in future. Don't forget us.
Yeah. Funny how that happens. So, Premier League, Formula One, and then Virtually Live. Is that right?
Yeah.
I got that right.
Right.
Virtually Live, and so Virtually Live. That was a startup, was it? When you joined?
It was a startup that used CGI and data to create an immersive proposition for rights holders. So think about Formula E race and putting yourself in the car during the track. It's early metaverse, quite frankly. You started in a lobby, right, and then you go into the track. You could jump around cars. They created a game where you could race in real time. Same as for a football stadium, being any seat in the stadium, etc. It was a startup.
So you could be in the seat of the car during a race, basically, to see to observe a real race. Exactly. In a different viewpoint. That's pretty cool.
Any viewpoint, that's really cool. Yeah. And then we integrated it into broadcast as well. We did fly-throughs of the track. It was brilliant.
That feels ahead of its time, really. Are they still around? I think you cut out there for a minute. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So, are they still around?
No, they're not. They're not around in practice. What happened was I did 3 years there. I saw the direction they were heading, and I jumped ship, quite frankly. Because, and I'll say this publicly, the CEO relied on the CTO too much, and the strategy was completely wrong. And I could see what was happening, and I didn't want to be associated with it. And a few months later, it was a downfall. So I think they're around by virtue of the fact that they've got some IP still that they own, but they never managed to fully develop the proposition.
I was going to say, because I was never massively into Formula One. My brother was more into that, and one of my bugbears with it is I always found that it wasn't particularly thrilling to watch. I found it a little dry, and especially live. Like I've been to some live events, and okay, there's the atmosphere and everything like that, but to sit there to just for 1 second every half an hour or whatever is okay, cool. I didn't find particularly thrilling, and I've said for a long time I think they need to do a lot more. So, and I know they're investing a lot more into making it more engaging to watch, but there's still a long way to go. This would have been amazing. Like if that was something that I could have got into, it would have engaged me far more in the sport. If that was something more readily available. But it feels like maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time, because now everyone has headsets, or a lot more people, let's say, have headsets at home. You know what I mean? It's almost like they were a bit early, maybe.
Yeah, you keep dropping out, Greg, actually, but you're back now. I think.
Oh, I do. Okay.
Yeah, so Formula E was the electric motorsport, and it was really challenging Formula One up to a point, and being innovative, and the fact that you could use a technology like Virtually Live with Formula E showed the way they were thinking, and it was starting to get adopted in broadcast and getting traction with broadcasters. And then Formula One, Drive to Survive. That's all you need to say. That's exactly just Formula One just managed to go on that upward trajectory, and Liberty came in, or had come in, and they just changed the whole way the sport operated. They opened up social media for a start, which Bernie had never liked, didn't think it brought them money. The challenge with Formula One is that you've got 20 drivers, and I used to say, if those drivers walked down Oxford Street, how many would be instantly recognisable to people in the street because they're behind helmets, or they don't do enough at the time. And these technologies offer something very different. What you're saying about Formula One is, a lot of people say we watch the first lap and the last lap. No, I watch a little bit more because some of the people involved, and I enjoy the racing, and actually my son enjoys it as well, and you can name every driver, and it's just an appointment to view. But if nothing's happening in the race, it is very boring. I don't dispute that, but the race at the weekend was quite exciting, actually.
Yeah. It goes on for a bit too long as well, but that's just me.
Do you know, it's quite interesting, because I'm sort of going to jump to a different tangent, because actually
Yeah.
yes, the races do go on so long. So if you look at eSports and the Formula One game and what they've done, is I used to always say to them, why do you replicate a Formula One race? Because it's boring. You've got this opportunity in a digital environment, with young people, to create something a little bit more exciting, a different proposition. Why don't you change the rules? Why don't you introduce mandatory pit stops and even just do something radical? Bring in refueling in the game. Just do something different. Why does it need to be
Fireballs? Put some gun turrets on the top. Mate, you have to fist fight to get round
Yeah,
the
I don't
bend.
think Formula
You have
One
to
are going
get
to
out.
approve that.
No.
No, I don't think so. Sadly not.
I'd watch that.
I bet you would.
I think a lot of people would. But no, you're absolutely right. You've got the ability to change the format a little bit. Why not have some fun with it? I mean, at that point, otherwise you might as well just hit a simulation button. Like you said, first lap, last lap. I mean, if you know the specs of the cars and you've got the basic information on the driver, you could probably just click a button and simulate the bloody thing, like they do with some football simulators,
Yeah.
But yeah, so you when did your interest in, because of esports was then, am I right? Because I'm just trying to figure out the timeline. So the next thing from there was you did a few advisory roles, but then you set that up as an actual company, did you? Like an advisory company, is that right?
Yeah, I had OW Advisory, and I was working with a startup, an IoT startup out of Israel that was owned by Ari Emanuel and another wealthy entrepreneur. Again, their strategy was wrong because they wanted to create an app and get all these rights holders to come on there. And I took them to see people like UEFA and others. And the message was clear. We want owned and operated channel content. We don't want to be diluting to you. So again, and then I also worked with, it was quite interesting. It was a football startup. They were trying to merge the north and south of Ireland into one league of football.
All right. Interesting.
So that was quite interesting. But my esports journey started at Virtually Live because we did an activation with Red Bull at their museum, which was a proper esports activation. And when I came out of Virtually Live, I met this guy and he's like, do you want to come to an esports event? So I went to see a Counter-Strike event at Wembley Arena, and I think
that must have been intense.
It was intense. I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I was like, wow, this is like incredible. This is full of families, it's short form, bite-sized content. I understand what's going on. Everyone's buying merch, everyone's dressed up, it's characters. It's just like, this is incredible. So I started to do some research, and this guy and I brainstormed a concept called London United, which would be a city-focused concept to help grassroots gamers take a path to pro.
I've just got to quickly interrupt this episode for a quick announcement, and that is that if you are a tech founder, a CEO, a business owner, well, the chances are that's probably why you're listening to this show. It is called Founders Unplugged after all. And if that's the case, then you really need to listen to what I've got to say. So look, as someone that's been in the tech startup world now for a very, very long time, and as a founder and worked with lots of businesses globally, working in those companies has taught me a really big lesson. And that is that finding the right tools for your team can truly change your business. That's why I'm really excited that today's episode is sponsored by Deal. That's Deel. It's an all-in-one platform for global teams. Deal is designed with the needs of the global workforce in mind. Seamless contract signing, easy expense uploads, in-platform time-off management. They can handle paperwork, exchange foreign salaries into local ones, and ensure compliance with local regulations, and loads more. Plus, its customer support team is available 24/7, and that is really, really important. If you're ready to see how Deal can transform your global operations, head to deal.com. That's DEEL.com to book your demo today. So thank you so much for Deal for sponsoring today's episode. You can use the link in the description or the QR code on the screen down there somewhere. And now we'll get back to the episode.
So think about football academies where footballers have got a path to go. Like, what is there in gaming or / competitive gaming, esports? And if you have a city-focused approach, it becomes a bit like teams. So it's like London United could be Arsenal, Riyadh United, Berlin United, so on and so on. And I said to him, I think this is great, but we need to have a purpose around it. And the purpose should be purpose, because otherwise we're not going to stand out from the crowd. If we use gaming and esports to address social purpose, that will stand us out from all the others in the market. As gaming is huge, isn't it? It's a couple of billion gamers in the world, but esports was continually growing, and then obviously during COVID became even bigger. But it was going to that Counter-Strike event that convinced me to actually try and get into the space. And I was starting to see non-esports execs come into the orgs, like, people from ESPN were going into the US esports orgs. And I thought, well, it's not untoward then from a guy like me who's got sports rights background to come into esports and try and do things a little bit differently. And that's what we did. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but that's how I decided to start the London United esports journey.
So were you aware of what Counter-Strike was at all before you went to that event?
Yeah, I'd heard of Counter-Strike, but if you said, what do you play? I said, well, I don't have time for video games, but I immediately immersed myself in... We never did Counter-Strike, but it was League of Legends and FIFA and Valorant and Dota. I mean, we did Dota at the beginning as
Dota,
well.
Jesus, yeah.
Huge. We had a Dota team in the UK, which wasn't the biggest market, actually, but you're right, it is a big game. But what did I used to play? Probably when I had my Amstrad CPC 464, how many years ago? With the tape set, I was probably playing flight simulators.
I had
and
that too.
Sensible Soccer. Remember Sensible Soccer?
Yeah.
And then I progressed, and then obviously FIFA. Oh, GoldenEye, Mario Brothers, Mario Kart at university.
Yeah, on the 64.
Yeah. And then
I remember the Amstrad. My dad bought me that Amstrad years ago, and it was basically like what is it called? Like turn-based games, wasn't it? It was like I don't know if that's what it's called. But it was text basically, and on the really earlier version of the Amstrad with the cassette tapes, it was a text-based game, and you would say, turn left, turn right, open the door. It was like Dungeons and Dragons basically, and that suited me just fine because at that age I was really into Games Workshop.
Yes.
And so it was basically that, and Dungeons and Dragons. So,
but then they went to floppy disk, didn't they, as well? Because I remember having a disk drive and going to games clubs where we basically traded games with each other.
I don't think I was fortunate enough to get that upgrade.
Oh, sorry. I'm sure.
I just had to
was it?
My dad was a bit of a tight ass.
You either had. So you had the Amstrad CPC 464. Then it was an Amiga and Atari. I got my generations wrong. The Amstrad CPC, I think it was CPC 464, was the first one we all had. And then you either had an Amiga or an Atari, and it was the Amiga that had the disk drive. But
yeah, we didn't get the Amiga or the Atari. We skipped to the N64 and the Sega.
You said you weren't fortunate. You've just lied.
But let's just say we missed out on the progression. The thing is, my mum and dad are split up. So my dad was, got me the Amstrad, and that was it. Like, I didn't get anything else. I had that for years. And meanwhile, at home, it was. And and to be fair, I think I got the Amstrad like when the 64 was out. So it's like, he was a bit behind, let's just say, with the technology side of things. Yeah, but that's interesting. So, it wasn't really... You really dived into this world then once it was shown to you, and you kind of embraced it from there.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And, it was very exciting, and I look at what we achieved with a lot of pride, and I look at the naivety I had, particularly in funding. Like, I was naive. I thought, do a proof of concept. It'll be easy to raise money. I'd never raised money before. I had no idea how hard it is to raise money. And I look back and go, would I make the same mistakes again? Well, obviously not. But did I do a huge amount? Would I do a huge amount differently? I'm still not sure. I mean, we started as an events-based business to host wannabe professional gamers in an environment that we could nurture them and develop them. So we held tryouts in the first instance, and then aligned with a social purpose cause. So knife crime, for example, we held Grime Against Knives at Lewisham Shopping Centre with the grime artist to try and find the best Apex Legends players. We did a FIFA event at Power League where we played five-a-side, and then we went to Red Bull Gaming Sphere and held the actual FIFA tryouts. Just to give you a couple of examples, we did education workshops online and Twitch. But the events-based side of the business took a big hit because COVID landed pretty well. Within a year of the business launching, we had COVID and Brexit, and we had how many other prime ministers in a month. And I had to walk away from a funding deal within the first 6-7 months because the term sheet and long form were so different. And then COVID came in straight after that, so it set us back. So I had a lot of challenges. But if I look at what we did in esports, and I say gaming as well, because we sort of intertwined between them, we established a reputation. We built a brand. I was in Forbes. We partnered with the Mayor of London, the Rio Ferdinand Foundation. We signed content creators. We created teams. We worked with some good brands. Like tick, 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 tick. Where's the big cross? This is where you put your heart on the table, isn't it? We didn't generate recurring revenue due to a lot of the circumstances that I've just alluded to. And it makes it very, very difficult. You're bootstrapping the whole time. You can't do what you want to do. You know you're on the cusp of something, but you just can't quite get to flip because you don't have the capital to do it.
But is that the only reasons, or is there something inherently broken within that industry? Because a lot of these large organizations are struggling. And
They are.
I don't seem to understand what, especially the actual teams themselves.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing, especially over the last 5 years or so, huge problems with hemorrhaging cash. Overspending obviously doesn't help, but just not really being able to replicate the right model. It's like no one's quite figured it out, and it seems mostly because people are coming from more traditional sports management and organizations and trying to replicate what they do there in the esports world, and it doesn't seem to be working. I mean, this is my very naive and ill-informed kind of overview of it, but is that broadly correct? What am I missing there?
No, is it broadly correct? There's elements of what you say have some truth. I think in the last couple of years there have been esports was on a crescendo of a wave after COVID, during COVID, and after COVID as well, and then it's obviously started to dip as you'd expect. But orgs had the wrong business models. A lot of them had the wrong business models and were spending way too much on player salaries. And actually, that was probably our death knell of our success. We got very successful. We were only planning to do grassroots amateur teams. We ended up with a professional Valorant roster. We got into the equivalent of the Champions League, the VCT. I thought this would be amazing. Brands would love this. And they actually said, no, we don't really want to be sponsoring your Valorant team. We want to be doing the purpose-driven events in Camden at your centre of excellence. So if I go back to your question, a lot of orgs had their own business model, and you've seen them pivot to become more entertainment propositions. But I recognized that very, very early on, because the sports sector and the esports sector work very different ways, particularly in broadcast rights, where you're not getting paid for broadcast rights in esports, whereas in traditional sport, everything comes with a pound sign, doesn't it? So the revenues aren't flowing to teams in esports the same way that they do in traditional sport. So there are less revenue opportunities for the esports orgs. But so I recognized that at the start, which is why I did a very early on NFT project, which was again purpose-driven with the Rio Ferdinand Foundation. We wanted to create a membership scheme. We wanted to do this education initiative called United Education. I was trying to create different revenue streams so that we would not be relying on traditional just sponsorship for players playing in events and competitions. And very badly managed a lot of the teams as well. I mean, look at Guild Esports that was floated under the Beckham guys, and it's just being flipped for very little. Because it was just so badly managed.
So it's mostly the broadcasting issue that's kind of suppressing the growth, then, you think?
That's partly, yeah. That's partly. Look, people overspend. They get into you wouldn't know if you weren't involved in the sector. You probably wouldn't appreciate the player transfer fees happen in video gaming. That's the level of spending that's going on.
It does feel like it's trying to emulate the what happens in Premier Sports, and it just doesn't quite have the bones and the foundations to back that up. That was the kind of vibe I was getting. Yeah. It feels like they're trying to do very much a top-down approach to it rather than a bottom-up approach. To your point about the grassroots.
The publishers own everything. The publishers control everything. Some publishers only use esports as a promotional tool. Some, like Riot, actually use it and invest in it for their own reason, but support the ecosystem. But if you look online at the moment, G2 and Resolve and others are talking about the lack of support in Rocket League from Psyonix, the publisher, that's just not making it feasible for them to continue competing. So it's you're at the behest of the publisher. With the Premier League, how many games there are each season, so you can actually, and the trajectory, and it's for 3 years. But in esports, you don't always have that certainty.
And I suppose you're also not sort of at the behest of the studio when it comes to, I don't know, changing the rules or releasing a new meta and like completely screwing over an entire entire sport overnight because of a new update, which has happened as well, right?
Oh, you see it
Especially
all
if you
the
look at
time,
like
yeah.
League of Legends and stuff like that. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but it's hugely interesting. I mean, I've always been so fascinated with this world, and I always felt like I would probably eventually end up doing something in this world, but I'm not. I'm going down a completely different path. But I find it really frustrating as a father of a boy who's like most parents with boys, especially who are really into things like Fortnite and Rocket League and all that. That there is just there isn't a local team, and I just find that absolutely crazy. Like, I can go and find a local football team, rugby team, bloody tennis team, hockey team, whatever. But for one of the most popular sports on the planet, it just isn't still taken seriously. There's just not a local group. And I've often thought about just doing it myself, but it's a lot of work. First of all, like even putting together a local five-a-side, team is a lot of work, let alone then having to look at it from a tech perspective. You know what I mean? The barrier to entry is quite high. I just feel like there needs to be those things. It's just crazy that we don't have them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I find it very
Well,
frustrating.
my first pitch deck, I think, for London United said there are no youth clubs around anymore.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Yeah.
And therefore, we want London United to go to various places across, it was called London by name, but actually we had a partnership with Durham University, for example, and various others. But that was the point. Like, where can kids go and socialize and learn skills as well? We were never an organization that endorsed sitting on your arse playing video games for 23 hours a day. It was, you got to get the right balance of mental and physical. And if you're playing with us, we'll bring a nutritionist in, we'll bring in a PT to talk to you about like what you need to do for cognitive health, etc., etc. But sitting in your bum for 23 hours a day, we're not that organization.
Well, and it's about the social part of it too. This is something that's always frustrated me a lot with the narrative around gaming, is that it's a very anti-social behavior or activity, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It's such a social activity. I mean, that's kind of the point, and one of the reasons why I get frustrated about the fact that there isn't a team, because locally to me for my son, because what I've noticed is their communication when they play as a team, him and his mates from school, is absolutely fucking terrible. Like they're shouting at each other, they're arguing all the time, and like I think back to when I used to start playing online games back in the day, like CS, and then later things like Call of Duty and Warzone. Like that's not how we would talk to each other at all. And that was just instinctive for us. But
Yeah.
now I think they need a bit of coaching, and that's a huge opportunity to teach them leadership qualities, good communication, strategizing, resource management. There's an enormous skill set in gaming that it's a treasure trove of skills that we can teach young kids, that can then trickle into other areas of their life.
100% transferable, 100%.
Yeah.
And we did something with the Mayor of London called the YOP eSports Champs, and we did education sessions on public speaking, video production, video editing, and social media management. So those were the four skills that we chose.
That's not even mentioning the skills adjacent to it if
Correct.
You want to do it as a profession. Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we said, look, these are skills that we're using every day, and we brought in industry professionals to talk to these college kids. And then we gave them an opportunity. We set them homework, and then we did 3 Twitch streams with some element of esports involved as well. But we gave them an opportunity to present what they did, and it was all about transferable skills. It's all about the socialization is spot on. But for me, it's about regulation. It's not regulation per se, but regulating how long someone spends on screens.
Self-regulating.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because if it's just like any other sport, you can overdo it too.
Correct.
Right? I mean, and you're not going to be at your A game if you overdo training and then you injure yourself. So it's the same thing with anything. It's just, I feel like there's so much opportunity there, and it's just being squandered. Like it's absolutely being squandered. And I'd love to see. Like I remember years ago, I was part of what's it called? There was a poker league, and I was part of that, and it was a grassroots type thing, run up and down the country. Started off with just a guy, and then he recruited other people to do it in different towns and cities, and it just grew. And it was this very basic thing. They would set up in a pub. and they would ask for a little area, and that was it. And everyone would have to pay a fee to join, and that was it. Really straightforward. Then you'd have regionals and then finals, and that was it. It was really well done. It was very basic, but it was well done. That's the type of thing we need. Just amateur people having a bit of fun, but then also getting the support on how to be better. And that's the kind of thing we need, I think. Yeah. And it's going to take a few people who have the interest, I think, to get together and do it. Maybe it's not our generation. Maybe it's the next generation. Maybe it's the next generation that grew up playing Fortnite every day that are going to then become parents and then see their kids play Fortnite or whatever else it's going to be, to then take it more seriously. I don't know. Maybe the ship has sailed, but it feels like such a huge missed opportunity.
You raised something about squandering opportunity, and I was just thinking, and maybe I'll ask you the question: have you ever in your life, as an entrepreneur, seen the amount of money being whittled away by maybe a competitor or someone else in your space, and thought, if I had a fraction of that, look what I could do, because look what I've done with nothing? And that is it Schadenfreude? I don't know what it's called, but that I had quite a lot of that in my London United journey, where I was properly bootstrapping. And I was, you only need to Google us in the press and you can see all the stuff we did. We brought in Connor Ball from the Vamps as an investor, and we did events at Samsung KX, and we did what we said we would do on the tin. It wasn't tokenistic. It was all around social purpose. And I just think, if I'd had a little bit of what Guild was spending and a little bit of what that one was doing, oh God, I could be flying even higher.
And you've mentioned this a couple of times, but the thing about social purpose as well is so important. To go back to the comparison of the football comparison, the impact that football and other sports like it has had on low-income areas around the world, on low-income countries around the world, let alone specific towns and cities and neighborhoods, has been transformative to some young families, young children's lives, to whole populations. And now you've got a huge generation of children into gaming, into eSports, and no one's doing anything with that from a social transformative side. Again, it's another huge missed opportunity, let alone just, looking at it from kind of a middle class perspective about, it's a shame that these kids don't have that. Like you were saying, the social impact side of it, what you were doing with kind of like the knife crime, for example, and all of that. I mean, we know that kids are, if they have the opportunity to do something else other than wander around the street and get in trouble, they would prefer to take that. But you've got to give them options, right? And like you said, you take away the youth centres and build over parks with multi-storey flats, then what choice do they have? I mean, it's not to forgive everyone for bad choices, but you know what I mean? It's just it's going to clearly push people down a certain route. So it's just again, another wasted opportunity. But it sounds like you guys were doing some amazing things. It's such a shame it didn't continue. In that sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it should have continued. I look back on where we got to, and in the last year of operating London United, I needed to raise more money. I needed to do a proper seed round, and I was having lots of conversations. The guy that was helping me raise money died. That I hadn't experienced that before. In the middle of conversations, and then everything just went away because of his unfortunate passing, and he left.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Well, and he left. There's another story to the fact that he left a trail of destruction as well. And then I had an investment, and I thought that this was the one that was going to take us to the next level. And to cut a long story short, it turned out to be a fraudulent investment. It was for 20% of the business. It was £1 million. I was like, okay, great, but I can see who you are, and you got a guy at KPMG that works for you, etc., and you're buying little stakes of football clubs, and you've got your Web3, you've got a DAO and whatever else, but show me the color of your money. Let's just do essentially an angel deal, put in 100 grand, let's see the color of your money. And it never came. Day after day after day, it's coming. And it sent the business into distress because I had to mothball, because I was going to raise money off the back of that. But you know what it's like, money follows money, you could bring in an anchor, etc. And by the time I recognised it wasn't going to come in, I couldn't really salvage the round properly. I wanted to look after the guys that were working for me, that first and foremost. I had a duty of care to them, and I also had my reputation to protect, and integrity is extremely important. So I had to mothball the business. So I helped all my guys find roles. I'm really proud of where they all ended up. and to this day, still very close with all of them actually. Mothballed the business and started talking to some prospective parties about an acquisition, and actually felt that I had the right party to take over. And to cut a long story short, they killed the community, racked up debt. I had to resign as a director, and the acquisition just never materialized like it was meant to on paper. So
it just killed
very
what was
sad
left,
by
basically.
it. Yeah, very
That's
sad.
very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, very sad to see your baby put down like that. This must have been, yeah. I mean, before I ask the question about that, what was the purpose of this fraudulent investor trying to pull that over you? What would they have got out of that if that was, I mean, in
If
some
I'm,
way successful?
if
I
I'm
don't
being
understand it.
generous, I think that they thought in the background they'd raise money. Probably similar to the company that acquired. They probably thought they had raised the money, and then it just didn't materialize for whatever reason.
Right. So they were relying on say some
That's me
limited
being
partners to.
generous. That's me being
Right.
generous.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm being the opposite, I'd say that they were looking to do it to further their ego, and it was almost like Walter Fitty, and they thought it was going to help them open doors, and it did. I took them to Sunderland. I took them to the boardroom. I used my network because they were interested in buying the shares of someone, and it did. It got them out and about, but they left a trail of destruction where they went. They bought a club in Greece, and it got very messy.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So presumably you went through a process of mourning then, right? At that time.
Did I go through a process of mourning? I mean, I certainly had throughout the London United journey some very dark days, because I had a partner who wasn't really a partner other than on paper. He had another business that he was raising for at the same time as we set up London United. He's actually ahead of the journey. And then you would go and see people like Deliveroo, and you didn't know if he was pitching his own business or London United to Deliveroo. Afterwards, you didn't know what he was doing. There was he was a lovely guy, but from a trust perspective and a work ethic, he probably had the work ethic, but his priorities were probably wrong. And he recognised it actually, and he diluted down throughout the journey. And he only wanted the best for the brand, but it was a real struggle when I was out there trying to raise money, and I'd given up a decent salary, and the sacrifices I was making, and he was ahead. So that was a really challenging period. You have to deal with it at some point, and my view is I'll deal with it when I have to deal with it, which I did. And then throughout the it always comes down to money, doesn't it? When you're looking over your shoulder and you realize you've got to pay the bills, it gets quite challenging, and things never happen to your timescale, do they? Even now, I'm experiencing it. Things just don't happen to the timescale that you want. So I had some very troublesome days, but I have a family, I had staff, I had stakeholders. You got to put a face on, don't you? I go to the gym every morning. I just get on with it still, and even if I was struggling mentally, I just got on with it. The period of mourning did happen after during the acquisition. Well, after the acquisition, actually, because why come in and not leverage something that is, right, let's say wavering around there, but certainly not down in the doldrums. Even to this moment, there's still issues going on where the holding company got dissolved, but London United, which is an asset of it, hasn't been dissolved yet, but they haven't done anything with it. And I was getting letters before action from the cleaning company in Camden. These guys moved all the businesses in, and they weren't paying the bills. And I was getting the landlord phoning saying, "Who are these people?" So whether it was a period of mourning or whether it was just a period of it's probably more a period of just sadness. I've never cried about it because no one gives a shit, quite frankly, do they? Other than your family. People recognize what we built up and think it's sad, but for me, that's probably a good description. It's just sad how it all ended, because as someone said to me last week, we did some really good stuff.
Absolutely, it sounds like you did, and I would agree with them. So yeah, so then. Well, actually, we're approaching the end of part one, but I'd like to hear what, I mean. Presumably, you get up, you dust yourself off, and then on to the next thing, right? Yeah.
Get a job,
so then
pay the bills.
Get a job, pay the bills. So we'll talk about that in part two. But yeah, it's so fascinating what you managed to achieve, and I think you should be And I'm sure you are, and I don't mean this to be patronizing at all, but like you should be incredibly proud of what you managed to achieve regardless, because the thing that I think is why I love speaking to founders, and what I find most sort of fascinating about founders is essentially what you're doing is you're magicking something into existence that didn't exist. You're moving mountains to make this thing be that wasn't there, and that's crazy when you think about it, and that's it's so admirable. So yeah, you should be incredibly proud of what you managed to achieve, even if it didn't quite go the way you wanted it to. But
no, I am. Thank you.
For what it's worth, I don't know, but,
no, I am.
Good. But yeah, I just realized it's the end of part 1, so we should probably say goodbye for now. And then for those listening and watching, thanks for watching and listening, and make sure you're subscribed and all that nonsense to get alerted for when part 2 comes out in a couple of days' time, where we're going to go into the sort of next part of Ollie's journey moving forward, and then find out a bit more about what he's up to now. So thanks for watching, and see you in part 2.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.